In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Maybe you have been very observant, and you've noticed that the candles are changed this particular Sunday. Well, on the far side, we have a special candle, and both of the candles have some kind of a reference to the gospel that we had read today about the bridesmaids and the wedding feast. At 11 a.m. in St. Louis, Missouri, I performed a wedding. And at that wedding, we had a unity candle. Perhaps you know what that is, where usually the bride is, and the groom's mothers, but this time it was the bride and groom's fathers, come up with a candle and they give it to the bride and the groom. And then they come over, the bride and groom, and they light a single candle, that particular one there, to indicate their unity. There are two students from Georgetown, class of 1995, and one of them, Mark Abadier, and Kimberly Rosteco. But Mark would attend Mass here daily, so I knew him very well. Anyway, you say, oh, but Father, that's a long time ago. That's a parable. It tells about what happened in the ancient past. And just because something's from a wedding today, well, that helps bring it a little bit up to date. But what was it really like in that ancient past? I knew you'd be asking that. So what did I bring? I brought over here a lamp from first century Jerusalem. In our theology department, we have Rabbi Abramowitz. He teaches a course in Judaism. And he knew that I lead people for a retreat over in Israel, and he told me, oh, you have to meet my brother over there. So anyway, he gave me the phone number, and we managed to meet. And the brother then gave me this lamp. And it was buried in the destruction of Jerusalem that took place in 70 A.D. and was dug up about 10 years ago. Anyway, there you see it. It's burning. Is it going to last? Is it going to continue burning all through today's night's Eucharist? We don't know. We don't know if that was lit by one of the foolish virgins or one of the wise virgins. Pay careful attention to Mass this evening. Okay. Anyway, the gospel that we have read there concerning these 10 bridesmaids, we can't really say all we'd like to say about the gospel because we don't know the details of wedding ceremonies from that period. It does seem like the wedding ceremonies would be held at night, and the central part, as we gather from the wedding ceremonies, is the groom and his party would come over to the bride's house and then lead the bride over to the new house and have a wedding feast inside, and by that it would become their house. That seems to be the basic activity that takes place. And here we see that whatever the delays of coming, the groom is late in coming, and they thought they brought enough oil, but they didn't. We find then they would make the procession from the bride's home to the groom's home, carrying lamps, maybe much like that lamp there. Maybe that lamp was carried in such a wedding procession. Well, you can come up and look at it after the Mass. I put it on a little tray because it leaks oil. So, with that, we have the parable. The parable, it tells about really those who have faith. And in a sense, I think we can look back and see what the faith we had as we were children was, and maybe we felt it was a very lively faith. And sometime we can look to that faith today and ask ourselves, what has happened to it in the meantime? And sometimes we can ask ourselves, how much faith did we have and what has affected it? And things do affect that faith. And we ask ourselves, has that faith gone out? Or will it go out? And I suggest, as the parable indicates, that if it does, we'll find ourselves outside, clamoring in the darkness. Now, I would read it myself that a fair amount of what we see as contemporary culture, when we compare it with the culture of those great ages of faith, as we can sometimes speak of the High Middle Ages, or as we can speak of the Renaissance, I think we can find that there's a certain clamoring in the dark that can make up our contemporary culture. I'd like to read just the way one philosopher, William Barrett, would speak of it in regards to Nietzsche. He has a passage that says, Nietzsche began with a confession of his own bankruptcy. He proclaimed that God is dead, and he also said that if the European human being were more honest or more courageous and had keener eyes for what went on in the depths of his own soul, he would know that a death has taken place there, despite a lip service that might be paid to the old formulae and the old ideals of religion. And Nietzsche asked, what next? What happens to the race when at long last it has severed the umbilical cord that bound it for millennia to the gods and that transcendent world beyond this earthly world? He placed his own life on trial in order to experience this death of God to its depth. Anyway, it's a reflection about Nietzsche, we know, in the last century there, and something of that proclamation that he made, that about the death of God. And there it has it, that the old formulae and the old ideals are still repeated, but they're just repeated over a vast emptiness. And they're repeated with a vast darkness. And people go about busily as if they were all true, but something fundamentally has changed. Now, I think there are ways that all of us can get some kind of a sense of that in today's world. Today's world, we have many of those old souvenirs of what faith was like, maybe in our parents' or our grandparents' time. And we ask what has happened in our own time. Now, I think in some way we can consider it, therefore, a cultural phenomenon, and all of us are deeply influenced and deeply formed by the culture that is all around us. But I also don't think that that gets at something else that is very central. And that's something that is very central. I would see it as the center of our own will. And at the center of our own will, sometime I think we can find ourselves having said a simple no to God. Just said a simple no. Maybe it was the different utterances of despair that we heard around us. Maybe it was something that we said in terms of a troubled family that we felt we were part of, and we didn't know which way to turn. Maybe it was in terms of some kind of a grievance that we felt that we were wronged. And we just found ourselves just taking some kind of a fundamental stance. Some kind of a fundamental stance that would be in opposition to God. And with that fundamental stance, almost a determination to live it out to the bitter end. I put it as something that is very individual. That passage of Nietzsche, it presents it as something that is very cultural, and something about what the culture as a whole is doing. And I do recognize that that culture does influence us. But beyond it, and maybe a fair amount of negativity that can permeate it, a fair amount of ridicule of religion that it can amuse itself with, a fair amount of clamoring in the darkness that we can hear around us. I still think there is something that is a fundamental light that we carry. We perhaps know that song. It's a country song and it's a Negro spiritual. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now when we hear phrases like that, do we know what is being talked about? And do we have such a light in our own life? Or do we find that somewhere along the line it just went out, as if the experiences of darkness that were all around us had overtaken us? And yet they don't simply overtake us. There is something of our own ascent. There is something of our own ascent to the forces of darkness that can let us move into that just general clamor and the noise of our times. And we find that we are participating in that empty clamor that I think can make up so much of the sounds and the noise of the modern world. Some kind of vacant glitters that cover over a vast emptiness. But I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think those ancient grievances have to be lived out to the end. I think that what we have to do is return to some kind of a central act of the will. And there where we have said a no, there where we have declared some kind of a conflict, we have to go back and say some kind of a yes. And that often means taking back something that we have said a long time ago. Some kind of a very central yes, and it's so simple to say it. We have to find our way back through all that darkness and say some kind of a simple yes. We continue afterwards with our life. But our life is different. For our fundamental yes, thy will be done, O Lord, has been said. And with that fundamental yes, we suddenly come into contact with something that our civilization has great difficulty with today, but that we can find. It just takes that simple yes on our part, and the light of faith is back. And we can walk by that light of faith. And we can live lives that are not simply a clamor in the darkness. I feel it's almost frightful how it comes down to ourselves in what we will do with our lives, what we will make of them. We watch, you and I, other people around us, and we ask, why are they that way? Other people ask it of us. I think there's something very central that makes us what we are is a very simple little yes at a place where a very simple little no had been spoken. And when that yes is spoken, we can say, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. I'm going to let it shine. And you know, that's how we've been made to live. And in spite of all the darkness that might be around us, we can walk in the light. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.